The morning sun, usually a balm to Sarah's soul, felt like a spotlight on a crime scene. She stood on her porch, a steaming mug of forgotten coffee in her hand, staring at the monstrosity that had consumed her driveway. It wasn't just on her driveway. It was her driveway. A colossal inflatable party tent, the kind usually reserved for community fairs or large-scale corporate events, had inflated overnight, its bulbous, candy-striped form now a grotesque monument to audacious entitlement. Tess stretched from the curb, past her beloved rose bushes, all the way to her garage door, effectively barricading her in. Balloons, still deflated and sad, lay scattered around its base, like casualties awaiting deployment. Folding tables and chairs were stacked haphazardly nearby, waiting for assembly. This wasn't some quaint little gazebo. This was a circus, a carnival, a brazen act of territorial conquest, and it was firmly planted on her property. A low growl rumbled in Sarah's chest. Karen. It had to be Karen. Her next-door neighbor, Karen Miller, was celebrating her 45th birthday this weekend, a fact Sarah had only gleaned from the casual, dismissive way Karen had mentioned a little get-together while Sarah was struggling to haul a bag of mulch. A little get-together, apparently, necessitated the annexation of private property. Sarah's fingers tightened around the mug, the ceramic groaning under the pressure. Her property was her sanctuary. After years of hard work, she had finally carved out this slice of peace, cultivated every bush, trimmed every hedge, precisely because she craved order and respect for boundaries. Karen, with her perpetually sunny disposition and utter lack of spatial awareness, was the antithesis of everything Sarah valued. Taking a deep, shaky breath, Sarah set the mug down on the porch railing with a decisive thud. She walked down her porch steps, the dew-kissed grass cool against her bare feet, until she stood at the edge of the tent's bloated fabric. Up close, it was even more offensive. The plastic gleamed cheap and garish in the morning light. She could hear the faint, distant hum of the industrial blower still working to keep the colossal structure inflated. "Karen!" Sarah's voice, usually modulated and polite, was sharp, cutting through the morning stillness. "Karen, what is this?" No immediate response. The hum continued. Sarah walked around the tent, trying to find an opening, a flap, anything that would allow her to physically access her neighbor's side of the fence. She found the main entrance, a wide, gaping maw of a zipper, partially open. She pushed through, stepping into the cavernous, slightly humid interior. The air inside smelled of new plastic and stale ambition. Boxes of party supplies were strewn everywhere. Karen was inside, supervising two harried-looking teenagers who were wrestling with a tangle of fairy lights. She wore a bright pink tracksuit, her blonde hair already perfectly coiffed. Karen looked up, her face beaming. "Oh, Sarah, good morning. Isn't it just magnificent? My sister found it online, a real steal. Perfect for a garden party, don't you think?" Sarah stared at her, utterly dumbfounded by the sheer audacity. "Karen, it's on my driveway." Karen waved a dismissive hand, as if swatting away a pesky fly. "Oh, that. Yes, well, we needed the extra space, you see. My garden just isn't big enough for all the activities. And yours is just so perfectly paved. It's really ideal." She gestured around the vast expanse of inflatable tent. "We're going to have bouncy castles, a popcorn machine, a cotton candy station, and a full-on karaoke stage. My theme is candy. Wonderland! Isn't it, darling?" "Darling?" Sarah's voice rose, a dangerous edge creeping into it. "Karen, I need to get my car out. I have a dentist appointment at 10, and even if I didn't, this is my property. You can't just annex it." Karen finally turned to face Sarah fully, her smile faltering just slightly, replaced by a look of mild irritation. "Sarah, darling, it's just for the weekend, and the party doesn't start until noon. Plenty of time for you to go to your dentist. You can just park on the street for a couple of days. What's the big deal?" Her tone was laced with condescension, as if Sarah were a small, unreasonable child. "The big deal, Karen," Sarah articulated, her voice dangerously calm, "is that you did this without asking. Without so much as a phone call. You just set up a small village on my private property." "Oh, come on, Sarah. Don't be such a stick in the mud." Karen laughed, a high, tinkling sound that grated on Sarah's nerves. "It's my birthday, and besides, we're neighbors. What's a little shared space between friends?" "We are not sharing," Sarah retorted, her eyes narrowing. "You have occupied. This is trespassing, Karen. Get it off my driveway. Now." Karen's face hardened. The saccharine sweetness vanished, replaced by a pinched, resentful expression. "You know, Sarah, sometimes you just take things too seriously. It's a party. It's supposed to be fun. And quite frankly, I think you're being incredibly rude. After all the trouble I went to—" She gestured dramatically at the tent. "The trouble you went to," Sarah echoed, her voice a low, furious whisper, "to disrespect my boundaries, inconvenience me, and treat my property as your personal event venue. Get it off, or I will," Karen scoffed, turning back to the teenagers. "Honestly, some people just don't know how to have a good time. Just ignore her, kids. Let's get these lights untangled." Sarah stood there for another moment, the humid air of the tent pressing in on her, the faint plastic smell suddenly overwhelming. Karen had effectively declared her personal war, and Sarah, usually a proponent of peaceful resolution, felt something snap inside her. This wasn't just about the driveway anymore. It was about respect, about standing her ground. She backed out of the tent, the morning light a welcome relief after the oppressive interior. Her mind raced. The dentist appointment could wait. This, however, could not. She surveyed the monstrosity again, her gaze sweeping over her own yard, then to the side of her house where her 4 Anglo-Nubian goats, Daisy, Poppy, Buttercup, and Thorn, were usually kept in their spacious fenced-in enclosure. They were her quirky passion project, excellent for keeping the brush down in the wilder parts of her sprawling property, and surprisingly affectionate companions. And they loved to eat. Anything. Everything. A wicked, vengeful thought began to form, blossoming into a full-blown plan. It was audacious. It was probably illegal. It was certainly petty. But it felt right. She walked purposefully towards the back of her house, her irritation fueling her steps. The goats were bleating, softly, already awake, their intelligent eyes following her as she approached their pen. "Morning, girls," she murmured, scratching Daisy behind her ears. Daisy nudged her hand, a soft, insistent demand for attention. "Today, you're going to earn your keep." Sarah spent the next hour preparing. She called the dentist, rescheduling. She checked the pressure on her automatic sprinkler system, the kind designed to keep her lawn verdant and her flower beds hydrated. It had multiple zones, including one that covered a good portion of her front lawn and, crucially, a significant overlap with her driveway. She adjusted the spray nozzles, aiming them strategically. It was a subtle, almost invisible system, buried, just below the surface, ready to spring to life at a programmed time. She glanced at her watch. 9:30 a.m. Karen's party wasn't due to start for another 2.5 hours, but guests would start arriving early, eager to get prime spots for the Candy Wonderland festivities. The music had started playing, a grating pop anthem that vibrated through the morning air, assaulting Sarah's peace. She saw a delivery truck pull up to Karen's house, disgorging a giant inflatable slide, followed by another truck carrying a massive speaker system. Karen was escalating. So would Sarah. She returned to the goat's pen. They watched her with their usual placid curiosity. "Okay, girls," she whispered, her voice a conspiratorial murmur. "Time for an adventure." Carefully, methodically, she opened the main latch of their large enclosure, then a secondary gate that led to a rarely used path along the side of her house, a path that ultimately emptied out into her front yard. She hadn't cleared it in a while, so it was slightly overgrown, a delicious buffet for 4 hungry goats. She didn't have to encourage them. Their natural curiosity and desire for fresh forage would do the trick. Daisy, the boldest, peered, out first, sniffing the air, her whiskers twitching. Then Poppy followed, then Buttercup, and finally the somewhat skittish Thorn. They ambled out, nibbling at stray leaves, completely oblivious to their impending role in an escalating suburban. Turfa. Sarah watched them for a moment, a grim smile touching her lips. Their 4 sets of cloven hooves, each capable of surprising agility and unexpected damage, were about to become instruments of chaos. She went back inside, locking her front door. She pulled out her phone, opened the app for her smart sprinkler system, and set the front yard zone to activate manually in 15 minutes. Then she walked to her living room window, pulling back the curtain just enough to observe. Karen's party was gaining momentum. More cars were pulling up, their occupants dressed in brightly colored outfits, some even wearing candy-themed accessories. Children, already high-pitched with excitement, were spilling out of SUVs. The inflatable slide was being unrolled, its vibrant plastic colors adding to the visual assault. The gigantic speakers were being positioned. Sarah watched as Karen, now wearing a birthday queen sash, emerged from the tent, greeting guests with exaggerated hugs and booming laughter. Karen Point. The silence that descended upon the miller's yard was deafening, broken only by the steady, unyielding hiss of Sarah's sprinklers and the contented, rhythmic chewing of 4 goats. Karen, still slumped on the wet grass, lifted her head, her face a streaky mess of tears and mascara. The sight of the gaping, goat-sized hole in her tent, framed by the now soggy pastel fabric, seemed to crystallize her humiliation. It wasn't just a party that was ruined, it was her image, her meticulously crafted facade of perfect suburban bliss. Greg, hovering awkwardly, finally managed to pull himself together. "Karen, honey, come inside. You're soaked. We can figure this out." Karen stared at him, her eyes burning with a cold fire that Sarah, watching from her window, recognized instantly as pure, unadulterated hatred. "Figure this out?" she rasped, her voice raw. "There's nothing to figure out, Greg. She attacked us. She attacked me. On my birthday. This is an act of war." She slowly pushed herself up, her clothes clinging to her, her earlier birthday queen sash now a pathetic sodden ribbon. Her gaze, filled with venom, swept from the ruined tent to the still spraying lawn and finally settled on Sarah's house. Inside, Sarah felt the weight of that gaze. The immediate rush of triumph was fading, replaced by a growing unease. She had made her point unequivocally, but Karen wasn't the type to concede defeat gracefully. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The goats, finished with their impromptu feast, now looked at Sarah's house with innocent, curious eyes, as if wondering when the next exciting activity would begin. Sarah sighed. She had to get them back. With another click, on her phone, she finally deactivated the sprinklers. The sudden cessation of the water felt stark, emphasizing the quiet wreckage of the yard. She stepped out onto her porch. The air, cool and fresh after the humid assault of the tent, carried the lingering scent of damp grass and slightly too sweet party cake. "Daisy, Poppy, Buttercup, Thorn, time to go home, girls," she called, her voice clear and firm. The goats, surprisingly obedient, began to slowly amble back towards the side of the house, stopping occasionally to sniff at a stray balloon or a forgotten party favor. As they passed the crumpled figure of Karen, Daisy paused, tilting her head as if in silent judgment, then let out a loud, drawn-out "Bah!" It sounded suspiciously like a mocking laugh. Karen flinched, then glared at the retreating goats. "You think this is funny, Sarah? You think you've won?" she screamed, her voice cracking. "You just wait. You just wait and see." Sarah ignored her, ushering the goats back into their pen. Once they were safely enclosed, she turned back to her front yard. The driveway was still a mess. The deflated tent looked like a beached whale, its colorful stripes now dull and stained. Scattered debris, from plastic cups to soggy cake crumbs, littered the once pristine pavement. This, too, was a consequence, but it was a temporary one. For the rest of the day, Sarah worked. She hauled out a power washer, carefully clearing the driveway of mud and debris. She swept up the remaining bits of plastic and cake. The tent, too large and heavy for her to move alone, remained, a sullen monument to the morning's hostilities. She saw Greg, looking tired and resentful, attempting to deflate the last bits of air and fold the massive canvas. Karen remained. Indoors, a shadowy figure glimpsed through her living room window, occasionally pulling back the curtain to stare at Sarah with undisguised fury. The neighborhood, usually a quiet, almost sleepy place on a Saturday afternoon, was buzzing. Cars drove by slowly, occupants craning their necks. Mrs. Henderson, the stern-faced neighbor, walked her poodle past Sarah's house twice, giving Sarah a small, knowing nod that was neither approving nor condemning, but simply acknowledging the undisputed facts of the morning. Other neighbors averted their gaze or hurried past, clearly unsure how to react to such an unprecedented display of animosity. Sarah felt the chill of their silence, the shift in the unspoken code of their suburban existence. She was no longer just Sarah, the quiet woman with the unusual goats. She was that woman. By evening, the tent was finally wrestled into submission, folded into a massive, lumpy rectangle that Greg struggled to drag into his garage. The debris was cleared, though the faint, sweet smell of sugar and wet plastic lingered in the air. Sarah's driveway, while clean, felt different, scarred by the invasion. Sarah ate a quiet dinner alone, the silence of her house louder than usual. The initial high of victory had completely dissipated, replaced by a gnawing anxiety. What would Karen do? Karen was not known for her subtlety or her ability to let things go. Her revenge, Sarah suspected, would be swift, public, and exquisitely designed to inflict maximum social discomfort. The next morning, Sunday, began ominously. Sarah woke to the sound of frantic knocking on her front door. She pulled on a robe and peered through the peephole. It was Mrs. Albright, her closest neighbor on the other side, a woman known for her meticulously tended garden and her fierce dedication to neighborhood harmony. Mrs. Albright's face was pale, her usually neat hair disheveled. Sarah opened the door cautiously. "Mrs. Albright, is everything all right?" "Sarah, dear, you simply won't believe it," Mrs. Albright whispered, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and morbid fascination. Karen has put up a sign. On her lawn, right on the property line." Sarah felt a cold knot form in her stomach. A sign? What kind of sign? She grabbed her coffee mug and walked out onto her porch, following Mrs. Albright's horrified gaze. There it was. A professionally printed large, garish banner affixed to two tall wooden stakes positioned precisely along the property line, facing Sarah's house. It was a picture of Karen, smiling brightly, clutching a birthday cake, presumably the one before Thorne's intervention. Below the picture, in bold, aggressive letters, read, "My birthday ruined by a mean-spirited neighbor and her vicious, destructive animals. Support your local community, not local bullies." Beneath that, in slightly smaller but still prominent letters, were the words, "Sarah Jenkins, Queen of the Goats, Destroyer of Parties," and then, worst of all, a small laminated picture of Daisy, Poppy, Buttercup, and Thorne, happily chewing on various party paraphernalia, was taped to the bottom, corner surrounded by crudely drawn X's. Sarah stared. Her blood ran cold. This wasn't subtle. This wasn't petty. This was a public denunciation, a deliberate attempt to shame and ostracize her. It was a digital age public shaming played out on a suburban lawn. Mrs. Albright wrung her hands. "She's been out there all morning, dear, talking to everyone who drives by, telling them her version. She even has a little donation jar for rebuilding efforts." Can you imagine? Sarah could imagine. She could imagine the whispers, the judgmental looks, the swift condemnation that would follow. She was no longer just that woman. She was the neighborhood villain. And Karen was playing the victim to perfection. Just then, a sleek black SUV pulled up to Karen's house. A woman with a perfectly coiffed blonde bob and an expensive-looking handbag stepped out. It was Brenda, Karen's sister, looking far too, composed for someone who had witnessed a goat-fueled cake massacre. Brenda surveyed the sign with a satisfied smirk, then turned and exchanged a triumphant, conspiratorial glance with Karen, who had now emerged, carrying a fresh cup of coffee and a box of donuts, looking surprisingly refreshed, considering the previous day's trauma. She waved cheerfully at the passing cars. Brenda gave Sarah a cold, dismissive look, then leaned in to whisper something to Karen. Karen nodded, her eyes twinkling with renewed malicious glee. The two women shared a dark laugh, a sound that carried across the perfectly manicured lawns, a sound that promised further, more insidious acts of retribution. Sarah stood frozen, staring at the accusatory banner, feeling a wave of icy dread wash over her. Karen wasn't just hitting back, she was mobilizing. This was no longer just about a driveway. This was about reputation, about community standing, and about who would control the narrative of their quiet suburban street. Sarah had won the battle, for her driveway, but Karen was determined to win the war for public opinion, and she had just fired her opening shot, a beacon of public humiliation that stood, stark and unforgiving, on the very boundary line between their homes. The screams from Karen's yard were music to Sarah's ears. The initial shock had given way to a scramble. Guests, soaked and flailing, tried to avoid the rotating spray of the sprinklers while simultaneously dodging 4 increasingly excited goats. The Candy Wonderland theme was rapidly devolving into a soggy, horned nightmare. Karen, her birthday queen sash dripping, stood amidst the chaos, her face a mask of incandescent fury. "Get them! Someone get those monsters off my property!" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at Daisy, who was now systematically nibbling at the fringe of a tablecloth, pulling it slowly but surely towards the ground. Plates of untouched mini quiches and fruit skewers slid off, splattering onto the now muddy grass. One of the teenagers, a lanky boy with an unfortunate mustache attempt, cautiously approached Poppy, who was attempting to chew through the power cord of a popcorn machine. Mrs. Miller, they're kinda big," he stammered, backing away as Poppy lifted her head, her yellow eyes fixing on him with an unnerving intensity. "Don't just stand there, do something," Karen wailed, turning to her husband Greg, who had finally emerged from the house, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He blinked, surveying the scene. The deflating tent, the panicked guests, the actively destructive goats, and his wife, drenched and apoplectic. "What in God's name?" Greg started, his voice a bewildered croak. "Sarah! Sarah did this!" Karen bellowed, pointing dramatically towards Sarah's house. "She unleashed her satanic livestock on my birthday party and turned on the sprinklers. The sprinklers, Greg! My hair is ruined!" Sarah, still at her living room window, allowed herself a small, triumphant smirk. Her hair was indeed ruined. Good. Greg, a man whose primary mode of operation was placid avoidance, finally spotted Sarah in her window. He took a hesitant step towards the property line, then stopped as a fresh blast of water from the sprinklers soaked his slippers. "Sarah, you gotta turn that off. And the goats!" Sarah merely tilted her head, giving him a polite but unyielding look. She mouthed, "My driveway." Greg threw his hands up in exasperation. "It's a birthday party, Sarah. What's wrong with you?" Meanwhile, the goats were making excellent progress. Daisy had moved on from the tablecloth to the actual inflatable tent itself. She'd discovered a loose seam near the base, and with a few exploratory nips, she realized the plastic was surprisingly pliable. A small rip, then a larger one, and the distinct sound of escaping air grew louder, a mournful sigh of surrender from the monstrous structure. Poppy, having given up on the popcorn machine cord, it was surprisingly tough, had moved to the sound system speakers, which, thanks to the water and her curious chewing, had begun to emit a series of alarming crackles before dying completely. Buttercup was gleefully prancing through the scattered balloons, popping them with her hooves, each loud bang adding to the cacophony. Thorn, surprisingly, had found a forgotten box of party favors and was systematically eating every single plastic whistle, confetti cannon, and miniature yo-yo. The children, initially terrified, were now starting to find the spectacle highly entertaining. A few brave ones even giggled as a goat trotted past, a streamer dangling from its mouth. Their parents, however, were less amused, primarily concerned with their soaked clothes and the impending cancellation of the bouncy castle. "This is not happening," Karen muttered, staring at the unraveling tent, tears of rage welling in her eyes. "This is my day." Suddenly, a wail erupted from the back of the tent. "My cake! They're eating my cake!" It was Karen's sister, Brenda, who had just set down a multi-tiered, pastel-colored masterpiece on a folding table inside the tent. Thorn, with a speed that belied her usual shyness, had indeed found the cake and was already halfway through the top tier, sprinkles clinging to her whiskers like festive confetti. Karen let out a guttural scream, a sound so raw and primal it momentarily silenced even the goats. "Those devils! My cake! It cost $300! Sarah couldn't help but laugh, a genuine, unburdened laugh that startled her even more than it would have startled Karen if she had heard it. It was a release, a catharsis for all the small indignities, all the ignored boundaries, all the times. Karen had treated her with casual disregard. Brenda, a woman of impressive stature and even more impressive vocal cords, charged towards Thorn, waving her arms. "Get away from my niece's cake, you furry fiend!" Thorn, startled by the sudden aggression, took off, a large chunk of pink frosting still clinging to her beard, leaving a trail of crumbs in her wake. She barreled past a bewildered guest, sending him sprawling into a puddle, then crashed into a stack of neatly arranged gift boxes, scattering them across the wet lawn. Greg, finally shaking off his stupor, made a dash for the sprinkler control box, which was located on the side of Sarah's house, just outside the perimeter of the spraying water. He fumbled with the lid, trying to find the manual override. Sarah watched him, her smile fading slightly. She had anticipated this. With a click on her phone, she disabled the manual override, locking the system down. Greg yanked at the lever, then again, his face reddening with effort and frustration. "It wouldn't budge!" "It's locked!" he yelled over the continued hiss of the sprinklers. "She locked the system!" "Of course she did," Karen shrieked, now looking like a drowned, angry rat. "She planned this! She's a psychopath!" A thin, stern-faced woman, Mrs. Henderson, from across the street, who had a reputation for being the neighborhood's unofficial morality compass, approached Karen. "Karen, dear, I understand you're upset, but perhaps you shouldn't have put the tent on Sarah's property in the first place. Boundaries, you know." Karen whirled on her. "Whose side are you on, Mrs. Henderson? My party is ruined. My birthday is ruined. And it's all because of that vindictive witch and her vile farm animals." The other guests, realizing the party was indeed a wash, began making their excuses, gathering their children, and heading for their cars, some looking furtively at Sarah's house, a mixture of shock and suppressed amusement on their faces. The once festive atmosphere had evaporated, replaced by damp humiliation. The goats, however, were still having the time of their lives. Daisy was now headbutting the deflating slide, making it bounce weakly. Poppy had discovered a discarded balloon pump and was attempting to chew on the plastic hose. Buttercup had found a large box of party napkins and was diligently tearing them into small, confetti-like pieces. Karen, seeing her guests deserting her, seeing her dream candy wonderland utterly demolished, finally crumpled. She sank to the wet grass amidst the scattered decorations and mud, burying her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs. Greg, looking utterly defeated, patted her awkwardly on the back, sending another spray of water onto her head. Sarah watched, for a moment longer. The tent was a sodden, sagging mess. The sound system was dead. The cake was gone. The guests were leaving. And the goats, blissfully unaware of the suburban drama they had unleashed, were still enjoying their unexpected feast. It was glorious. It was complete. But a sharp pang shot through Sarah. This had felt good. Too good. The satisfaction was immediate, visceral, but it also felt isolating. She had won the battle, but at what cost? She was now the neighborhood pariah, the woman who had unleashed goats and sprinklers on a birthday party. Would she be able to look her other neighbors in the eye? Would Karen ever forgive her? Or would this escalate into an even uglier, more protracted war? As the last car pulled away, leaving only Karen, Greg, and the 4 happily munching goats amidst the watery ruins, Sarah heard a distinct, loud R.I.P. from the tent. Daisy, it seemed, had finally managed to tear a hole large enough for her to walk straight through, leaving a perfectly goat-sized exit from the now deflated structure. The industrial blower, freed from the resistance of the collapsing tent, gave a final wheezing gasp, then died, plunging the scene into an eerie silence, broken only by the steady hiss of the sprinklers and the contented chewing of the goats. Karen lifted her head, her face blotchy and tear-streaked, and saw the gaping hole in her tent, a perfect, mocking silhouette of Sarah's triumph. The silence stretched, heavy with the weight of utter, irreversible defeat. Sarah spent Sunday in a haze of simmering anger and strategic thought. The banner on Karen's lawn pulsed with accusations, a bright, garish blot on the quiet suburban street. Every car that slowed down, every whispered conversation among passing dog walkers, felt like a fresh stab. Mrs. Albright's initial shock had been replaced by a cautious distance, a clear signal that the neighborhood was taking sides, or at least retreating from the escalating conflict. Sarah had become the villain of the piece, painted by Karen as the queen of the goats, destroyer of parties. She couldn't ignore it. To do so would be to concede defeat, to allow Karen to control the narrative entirely. But what could she do? A counter-banner seemed petty, a childish tit-for-tat. Calling the police felt like an overreaction, though the thought of a restraining order had flickered through her mind. No, this was a social war, and it needed a social counterattack. By Sunday evening, an idea began to form, subtle yet potent. Karen thrived on public perception, on being the beloved, bubbly hostess. Sarah decided to leverage that. She would hit Karen where it hurt most, her carefully cultivated image. But she wouldn't stoop to direct insults. Instead, she would use the truth, framed in a way that exposed Karen's underlying hypocrisy. Monday morning, Sarah put her plan into motion. She started by gathering evidence. Photographs of the tent sprawled across her driveway, indisputable proof of the encroachment. Pictures of the deflated tent, clearly showing the goat-sized hole. She even had a short video taken from her phone, showing Karen herself, mid-shriek, surrounded by the spraying sprinklers and her hungry herd. She compiled the images and the story, concise and factual, focusing on the lack of permission, the disregard for property rights, and the sheer scale of the invasion. She decided to tell her side of the story, not as a rant, but as a calm, logical explanation of events. Her target, the community Facebook group, Maplewood Neighbors Connect, was a seemingly innocuous online forum, but it was the digital town square where local gossip thrived and reputations were made or broken. Karen was an active popular member, constantly posting about her garden, club, her charity bake sales, and her perfect family. Sarah drafted her post carefully, choosing every word with precision. No name-calling, no dramatic accusations beyond the facts. Just a clear, unemotional recounting of the events. She attached the pictures, including the one of Karen's accusatory banner, subtly emphasizing its aggressive nature. She ended with a simple, direct question. What would you do if your driveway was completely blocked without permission for a commercial-sized event? She paused, finger hovering over the post button. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. The public square. It could backfire spectacularly. But leaving Karen's banner unchallenged was no longer an option. Taking a deep breath, she pressed post. Within minutes, the notifications started pinging. A few initial comments were from Karen's supporters, vague statements about neighborly love and understanding. But then the tide began to turn. Mrs. Henderson, surprisingly, was one of the first to comment, her usual terse style replaced by a firm, "Property lines are property lines. Unacceptable." Then came a flood. "A whole tent on your driveway? Seriously? Without asking? That's just rude. I saw that tent. It looked like a circus. On someone's driveway? Who does that? Those poor goats just wanted some cake, I bet." A few people remembered other minor transgressions of Karen's, small moments of entitlement that had previously been dismissed as just Karen being Karen, but now, seen through the lens of Sarah's post, took on a new, more irritating significance. The initial shock of Karen's public shaming banner began to shift. Neighbors who had averted their gaze from Sarah now looked at Karen's sign with a different understanding. It wasn't just a quirky neighbor dispute. It was a brazen violation of a fundamental suburban code, respect for boundaries. Karen's carefully constructed image of community-minded sweetness began to fray. Sarah saw Karen's frantic activity online. Comment after comment, trying to defend herself, accusing Sarah of being unhinged and animalistic. She posted pictures of the ruined cake, conveniently omitting the goat that had eaten it, and photoshopped images of her tent looking pristine, trying to downplay the damage. But the raw, unedited photos Sarah had posted, showing the sheer scale of the tent and the actual chaos, spoke louder. The climax of the online battle came when a particularly insightful neighbor, an elderly gentleman named Mr. Peterson, who rarely commented, simply posted, "It seems the issue isn't the goats but the tent and the communication." His calm, rational tone cut through Karen's histrionics like a knife. The most damning blow, however, came from an unexpected source. Mid-afternoon, Sarah heard a car pull up. It was the delivery truck from Mega Party Rentals, the company that had supplied Karen's colossal tent. Two burly men got out, looking grim-faced. They walked straight to Karen's house. Sarah watched from her window as one of the men held up a large, official-looking document. Karen emerged, her smile plastered on her face, but it quickly dropped as the man spoke. Sarah couldn't hear the words, but she could read the body language. The men were stern. Karen was agitated, gesturing wildly. Greg came out looking bewildered as usual. The conversation went on for several tense minutes. Finally, the men pointed at the giant professional banner on Karen's lawn. The older man shook his head, then pointed to the folded tent inside Karen's garage. He handed Karen another piece of paper. Karen snatched it, her face twisting in disbelief as she read it. The men turned and walked away, back to their truck. Karen stood frozen, the paper clutched in her hand. Greg put an arm around her, trying to usher her inside, but she remained rooted to the spot, staring at the banner. A few minutes later, Brenda's sleek SUV pulled up again. Brenda burst out, looking furious. Karen showed her the paper. Brenda read it, her face paling. She looked at the sign on the lawn, then at Sarah's house. Sarah, watching, felt a fresh wave of satisfaction, different from the raw triumph of the previous day. This was a strategic victory. She had used logic and evidence, exposed hypocrisy, and let the truth speak for itself. Later that evening, the Maplewood Neighbors Connect group erupted again. Not with accusations against Sarah, but with a new post from a different neighbor, one who clearly had ties to Mega Party Rentals. Just heard from a friend at Mega Party Rentals. Apparently, Mrs. Miller tried to demand a full refund for her ruined tent, blaming it on unforeseen animal interference. But the rental agreement clearly states it's the renter's responsibility to ensure adequate space and secure the rental against damage. And guess what? Their contract specifically prohibits setting up on a neighbor's property without a signed waiver from the neighbor. They've apparently fined her for breaching the contract and for the damage to the tent. Also, the company is demanding she remove that defamatory banner immediately, or they'll sue her. They said their reputation is being damaged by her claims. Sarah gasped, a genuine shock rippling through her. Not only had Karen been outed online, but her attempt to claim victimhood had backfired spectacularly, costing her financially and legally. Her own company, the source of her original transgression, was now demanding she remove her public shaming banner. Sarah walked to her window. The banner still stood, glowing under the streetlights, a monument to Karen's pride and malice. But now it looked less like a declaration of war and more like a sign of impending doom for Karen. The justice, Sarah realized, wasn't just in the goats and the sprinklers. It was in the swift, public, and self-inflicted unraveling of Karen's own deceit. The banner, the very symbol of Karen's triumph, was about to become the instrument of her down. The Maplewood Neighbors Connect group buzzed with a newfound fervor. The reveal about Mega Party Rentals and their legal threats against Karen was the kind of juicy, unexpected twist that fueled suburban gossip for weeks. The initial sympathy for Karen, carefully cultivated by her birthday queen banner, evaporated like dew on a summer morning. Now the comments ranged from outright condemnation to quiet schadenfreude. People recalled Karen's past minor infractions, the time she organized a loud block party without informing anyone, the way she routinely parked her oversized SUV half on the sidewalk, the incessant unsolicited advice she dispensed. Her carefully curated image of community matriarch had imploded. Sarah watched it all unfold from a quiet distance. The satisfaction was profound, a deep, resonant hum of vindication. She hadn't lifted a finger, hadn't uttered a single accusatory word beyond her initial factual post. The truth, combined with Karen's own overreach, had done all the work. Karen, however, was not one to go down without a spectacular fight. For a full 24 hours after the rental company's demand, the banner remained defiantly on her lawn, a stubborn beacon of her wounded pride. She was clearly in denial, or perhaps planning her next desperate move. Sarah saw Brenda's SUV parked at Karen's house for hours, suggesting intense strategy sessions. Greg, meanwhile, looked increasingly harried, often seen pacing his yard, nervously glancing at the banner and then at Sarah's house. On Tuesday morning, the true impact of the rental company's threat seemed to finally sink in. A process server, a stern-faced woman in a dark suit, arrived at Karen's door, clipboard in hand. Sarah watched from her kitchen window as the woman delivered a thick envelope to a visibly shaking Karen. Whatever was in that envelope, it solidified the reality of the situation. Karen's face, usually animated, was pale and drawn. She slammed the door, the sound echoing through the quiet street. Minutes later, a loud, distressed wail erupted from Karen's house, followed by the muffled shouts of Greg trying to calm her down. Brenda's car screeched to a halt in the driveway. And she burst out, her face a mask of concern. The drama was palpable, even through closed doors. Later that afternoon, a crew from a local sign company arrived. They were efficient, professional, and utterly devoid of emotion. They walked straight to Karen's lawn, began dismantling the accusatory banner, rolling it up tightly. Karen watched from her living room window, a shadowy, defeated figure. The removal was swift, silent, and deeply symbolic. The stark, empty patch of grass where the banner had stood seemed to hum with the lingering resonance of its public declaration, now rescinded. The relief Sarah felt was immediate and immense. The physical manifestation of Karen's animosity was gone. But the quiet satisfaction didn't last long. The air, stripped of the banner's visual aggression, now felt thick with an unspoken tension. The war may have ended, but the peace was fragile. That evening, as Sarah was watering her rose bushes, she saw Karen emerge from her house. She walked slowly, not towards Sarah's property, but towards the street, her shoulders slumped. She looked smaller somehow, less vibrant. Greg followed her, his arm tentatively around her waist. They paused by the curb, and Karen looked towards Sarah's house. For a moment, Sarah braced herself, expecting another outburst, another accusation. But Karen just stood there, her gaze, lingering on Sarah's driveway, then on the rose bushes, then finally on Sarah herself. Her eyes, devoid of their usual sparkle, seemed to hold a flicker of something Sarah hadn't seen before. Not anger, but profound weariness. And something else, something akin to grudging respect. Or perhaps simply the exhaustion of a battle lost. Then Karen did the unthinkable. She lifted a hand, a small tentative wave. It wasn't a friendly wave, not exactly. It was more of a defeated acknowledgement, a silent surrender. Greg nudged her gently, and they continued their walk, heading down the street in the opposite direction from Sarah's house. Sarah stood frozen, her watering can forgotten. A wave? After all of it? The tent, the sprinklers, the goats, the banner, the public humiliation, the legal threats. A wave? It was an anticlimax, and yet somehow it was more potent than any shout or accusation. It was the quiet admission of defeat. The next day, Tuesday, a small, tastefully wrapped gift basket appeared on Sarah's doorstep. It contained a small, delicate peace lily plant, a selection of artisanal cheeses, and a card. Sarah opened the card, her heart hammering. The handwriting was unmistakably Karen's, neat and elegant, a stark contrast to the chaos she usually embodied. Sarah, I was wrong. About the driveway, about the party, about everything. It was audacious, disrespectful, and frankly, stupid. I got carried away with my Candy Wonderland idea and completely overstepped. I apologize for the inconvenience, the mess, and the public spectacle, and I especially apologize for the banner. That was petty and unforgivable. I understand why you did what you did. Honestly, I probably would have done the same. Perhaps we can, in time, move past this. Karen. Sarah reread the card, then again. She looked at the peace lily, then at her driveway, now truly clear and peaceful. The peace wasn't just a plant. It was a fragile olive branch. She walked to the fence, to the boundary line that had become the epicenter of their war. She looked at Karen's house. It was quiet. No loud music, no looming tent, just a normal suburban home. Sarah turned and walked back to her house. Her mind was surprisingly clear. The intense, almost addictive thrill of the conflict had dissipated, leaving behind a sense of calm. The goats were still in their pen, happily munching on some fresh hay, oblivious to the diplomatic breakthrough they had inadvertently facilitated. She picked up her phone, opened the Maplewood Neighbors Connect group, and drafted a new post. Not about Karen, not about the past. Instead, she posted a picture of her 4 Anglo-Nubian goats happily grazing. Her caption was simple: "My trusty lawn mowers. Anyone need some weeds cleared? They're surprisingly efficient." It was a small, quiet act. A return to normalcy. A subtle reintroduction of her vicious, destructive animals, not as weapons, but as helpful members of the community. It wasn't an explicit offer of friendship to Karen, but it was a public signal that the war was over, that she was willing to move forward, and perhaps even reclaim her identity not as the destroyer of parties, but as simply Sarah, the woman, with the goats who understood boundaries. And as the first few likes and smiling emojis started to appear on her post, Sarah knew with a quiet certainty that a different kind of peace had finally settled over Maplewood. The tension hadn't vanished entirely, but it had shifted, replaced by the possibility of an uneasy but ultimately livable coexistence.